you're listening to Abstract AF and I'm Sneha Jaiswal. And for this episode, we are going to be talking about 21 Studio Ghibli movies and which ones you should be watching first. If you are an animation enthusiast or somebody who likes watching animated films, you probably already know about Studio Ghibli. But for those of you who don't, it's a Japanese animation studio that is headquartered in Tokyo and was founded on June 15th, 1985 by Hayao Miyazaki, Isao Takahata, and Toshio Suzuki. This studio has churned out animated films that have been the highest grossing movies in Japan and have won awards all over the world. As a huge fan, I'm not going to be ranking the films because that's close to sacrilege. You cannot rank Studio Ghibli films. Each one is unique in its own way, with varied themes that cater to different kinds of audience. For example, Spirited Away is undoubtedly one of the most famous Japanese animated films in the world. Even if you don't know about the film, you would have definitely seen images of that movie online, maybe in memes or in videos, in photos, in posters that you have seen in the rooms of online influencers or on t-shirts. You just didn't know that it was from Spirited Away. But for me, while I absolutely enjoyed watching Spirited Away, there are at least 3, 4 other Studio Ghibli films that I completely loved more. So I'm just going to start in chronological order of the films as they came out. Movie number 1, Laputa, Castle in the Sky. Castle in the Sky came out in 1986. It was written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki. It starts in typical whimsical Studio Ghibli manner with a young orphan boy who spots a girl falling from the sky like an angel into his mining town.
The way you fell from the sky, I thought that maybe you were an angel or something.
What?
Yeah, I had to catch you.
The girl is being hunted by a group of military men because she apparently has a magical crystal pendant that can lead them to a floating castle in the sky that is believed to hold a lot of hidden treasures. The film was a massive success and has a 96% approval rating on the critic site Rotten Tomatoes. The name Laputa was inspired from the popular classic Gulliver's Travel by Jonathan Swift. In the book, there is a flying island called Laputa that is powered by a giant central crystal. For a film from the 80s, the animation is top-notch. But for 21st century watchers, the pace might seem a little slow. Regardless, it's a really good film that doesn't seem outdated with flying machines and friendly robots. The robots in the film reminded me of the 1999 American animation film The Iron Giant, which is a brilliant film about a boy befriending a giant alien that resembles a robot. And I have a fan theory that the robot could be inspired by the castle in the sky. Moving on to number 2, Grave of the Fireflies, that came out in 1988. It's a war tragedy film that was written and directed by Isao Takahata. This movie can break your heart. It tells the story of 2 little siblings, Sita and Setsuko, desperately trying to survive during World War II with nobody to look out for them after their mother dies during the bombing of their city Kobe. Grave of the Fireflies is easily one of the most moving war films ever made. And if you think animated films are meant for children, watch this one and it will change that opinion forever. Even the late film critic Roger Ebert, who was extremely hard to impress, had said that Grave of the Fireflies is one of the greatest war films ever made. Unlike a lot of Ghibli films that are lighter, with magical elements and bizarre little happenings, this film is very dark, with flawed characters, and it takes a very grim look at war. It does not delve into politics of war, instead focusing heavily on personal loss and how your own countrymen can fail you when you need them the most. The director Takahata himself had survived an American air raid in 1945 when he was just 9 years old. So this is a film that has been made by someone who has experienced warfare and the devastation firsthand. Unless you have a specific aversion for emotional war movies, you have to watch this film. I'd recommend it to everybody. Also, it has a 100% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Beat that. Movie number 3, My Neighbor Totoro, that came out the same year but was directed by Miyazaki and is nothing like Grave of the Fireflies. It's an adorable, heartwarming tale of a little girl that befriends a strange forest being she calls Totoro. What's funny is that the studio didn't think the movie would do well, but it went on to become one of the most famous animated films in the world, with major magazines including it in their top 10 and top 50 lists of animated creations. I think the charm of the film lies in the fact that it shows this lovely coexistence of modern society with strange spirits from the forests. There is this touch of mysticism to it, but it invokes childhood nostalgia and reminds you of what it was like to be little and carefree. The character Totoro is drawn simply. He exudes the fuzzy warmth of a teddy bear and leaves you with a long lasting imprint on your mind. It's hard to forget him, which is why Totoro eventually became the mascot for Ghibli. I saw it so many years ago, and even though I don't remember everything in detail, Totoro's image is fresh in my mind. And the fact that this film made me happy by the end of it. You should definitely watch it. Movie number 4, Kiki's Delivery Service, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. This came out in 1989 and is like the Japanese version of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, except that Kiki is younger, simpler, and much more independent because she leaves her house at the age of 13 and starts a delivery service. Her mode of transport is obviously her flying broom. It's explained that it's a tradition for young witches to set out by themselves when they are 13 and find their calling in the real world. You have to love the theme that emphasizes on a young girl's need for independence without being a rebel without a cause. Kiki is sweet, hardworking, and is trying to adjust to a life in a faraway land away from her parents. Having a job is never easy, and Kiki suffers setbacks like any other human being, despite being a witch. To anybody who has ever lived in a boarding school, Kiki's character might seem very fascinating and relatable. The story also reflects a little on the Japanese culture, where kids are a lot more independent than their peers worldwide. I don't think the makers were trying to deliver any sort of message with this film. It's largely a sweet, entertaining movie that you can watch with the family. Movie number 5, Only Yesterday, directed by Isao Takahata, that came out in 1991. Now, this is a film that is like a slow song that'll stir up a lot of nostalgia within those who can relate to the material. It tells the story of Taiko Okajima, a 27-year-old unmarried woman who works in Tokyo and decides to take a trip to a family farm in the countryside to help out in the harvest season. She then starts to remember her life as a 10-year-old schoolgirl, so there are a lot of flashbacks.
Could you ever see yourself living in a place like this? Tycho!
Hey, farm girl!
Perhaps my fifth grade self is trying to tell me to find a new way to fly.
For example, Taiko remembers wanting to go somewhere for her summer vacation, anywhere that's not the city she lives in, and she begs her mother for the same. And that's something that is probably relatable to so many of us. We have all at some points been jealous of that kid at school who got to go to some place fancy with their parents for the summer, while all you did was roll in the mud with the neighborhood kids. Anyway, Only Yesterday is a stunning piece that would especially touch the hearts of women who grew up in a time before the internet. It would feel slow and boring for viewers who prefer fast paced action films or pieces where a lot of action is happening, but I think it's a great, beautiful break from the overly sexed up, violent animated films that come out today. Movie number 6, Porco Rosso, that came out in 1992 and was directed by Hayao Miyazaki. I saw this very recently, just in 2020, when Netflix acquired the rights to stream all of Ghibli films except for Grave of the Fireflies. The animation just blew my mind. Like a lot of 21st century animated films would pale out in front of this 1992 production, and that is just reflective of the kind of hard work that goes into making these movies. Porco Rosso is about a former World War I pilot who has become a freelance bounty hunter, and for some inexplainable reason, he has a pig's head on a human body. However, Porco Rosso runs into trouble with the establishment and the government wants his head. This animated film has it all, a dash of fantasy, action, drama, romance, with a pinch of the absurd. Despite the main protagonist being a walking, talking pig, the makers managed to make the viewer take him seriously. And in the end, you develop affection for this enigmatic hero. This is a very underrated Ghibli title, and even the most cynical of viewers might like it. Movie number 7, Ocean Waves, directed by Tomomi Mochizuki, which came out in 1993 and focuses on a love triangle between three teenagers who are in high school. So, this is definitely not my favorite Ghibli movie. The characters are not very interesting, and the pace was slow even for a patient viewer like me. I wouldn't say that you should skip this film. Watch the trailer, decide for yourself. Just that nobody will find me recommending this one. I felt it's a little too serious for a teen film, even though it does have a certain charm to it. Ocean Waves has a 88% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, so most critics definitely have a positive opinion for this one. Movie number 8. Another underrated gem, the 1994 Poko, directed by Isao Takahata. I've never read or heard praise for this film, so I obviously ended up watching it only after it became available on Netflix in 2020. Even as I write about it, its upbeat theme music is playing in my head. The film starts off with a happy children's song and raccoons hunting for food in a lush countryside setting. But the green surroundings that they spend their blissful evenings in is invaded by monstrous machines meant to cut down trees that will eventually make them homeless. The raccoons of Pompoko are no ordinary animals. They have the power to shapeshift. So a bunch of them decide to save their habitat from being obliterated by rapid industrial development. The idea is inspired from Japanese folklore about how some raccoons turn into human beings during the season of spring and sing songs. Despite having magical elements to it, the movie is a powerful message on just how we are destroying forests and hurting animals. I was actually in tears by the end of it, so yeah, I loved this film. Some viewers might think it's slow and a little bizarre in between, but for me, it's an absolute masterpiece and deserves a lot more attention than it gets. Movie number 9, Whisper of the Heart, that came out in 1995. Okay, I think I'm going to stop giving details like who directed them and stuff that you could just find on Wikipedia anyway. So for me, the highlight of this film was the wistful rendition of Country Roads Take Me Home, the famous song by John Denver.
Life is old there, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, growing like a breeze. Country roads, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia.
The musical elements of this film really stand out and will have you humming along. But let's talk about the story. The protagonist is a teen called Shizuku, a voracious reader who realizes that all the books she has been borrowing from the library have already been read by the same guy. Curious, she starts looking for the boy and is in for a big surprise. This is a classic Studio Ghibli film, which charmingly mixes the mundane with the magical. It has the innocence of a teen romance, the maturity of an adult drama, with some sprinkling of the mystical. Some might find it's a slightly dramatic turn of events towards the final leg of the film a little weird and out of place, but I usually savor the bizarre, so this film had the right kind of eccentricity to it. Movie number 10, Princess Mononoke. Now, this is an epic animated film about man versus nature. It has gods, demons, forest spirits, curses, and despite all the superhuman and supernatural elements, Hayao Miyazaki explores an issue that is as relevant as ever: the conflict arising out of the rapid industrial civilization and the toll it takes on natural elements of our world. It's hard to summarize the film in a line or two because it's a very complex tale that begins with a village being attacked by a vicious demon, and their prince, who is called Ashitaka, ends up with a curse that will eventually kill him. Now, Ashitaka has to go on a journey to find a cure, and his travels lead him to San, a girl who lives with wolves and hates human beings. And that's where we see the forest kingdom pitted against the world of humans. The animation is stunning and the story will pull at the heartstrings of adult viewers. It's hard to survive this film without getting emotional and is easily one of the best films made by the studio. Movie number 11, My Neighbors the Yamadas. Now, this is a bit of a weak link for me. The 1999 film, written and directed by Isao Takahata, is very simple and comic strip style. It'll remind a lot of viewers of Shin-chan, a popular Japanese cartoon that first came out in 1990 and since then has become so popular that it's played across the world now. So yeah, coming back to My Neighbor the Yamadas, it's very Shin-chan like and I'm not a fan at all. The Yamadas consist of Mr. and Mrs. Yamada, and they have two kids and a dog. The story is divided into little segments that shows how the family goes about their lives, how they fight over simple things like what to watch on the TV, and also they're kind of a harebrained couple that loses their little kid in the mall. This film was a little slow and tedious and not as hilarious as it could potentially be. Give it a go if you are a Shin-chan fan. Movie number 12, Spirited Away. We're back to the traditional animation that Studio Ghibli goes with, and this 2001 fantasy is easily, like I already said at the start, one of the most famous Ghibli movies ever made. In a 2017 article titled 25 Best Films of the 21st Century, New York Times called Spirited Away the second best film of the century. And, well, they might be right. I mean, it's been over a decade since I last saw it, and I still remember one of the opening scenes of the film where the protagonist, the 10-year-old Chihiro, is moving to a new place with her parents, and they stumble upon a weird place along the way. Chihiro's parents notice a food-laden stall with amazing dishes, and they just start gorging on the food even though there is nobody manning the stall, saying, oh, we'll pay them later.
I don't want any. We're gonna get in trouble. Let's just get out of here.
Don't worry. You've got Daddy here. He's got credit cards and cash.
Chihiro, you have to try this. It's so tender.
Chihiro refuses to join them in eating this unclaimed food, and to her horror, she realizes that her parents turn into pigs as they gluttonously continue eating the food. It's up to the little girl now to figure out a way to make her parents human again, and thus begins the beautifully bizarre adventure Spirited Away is, with evil witches and flying dragons. If you've never seen a Ghibli film, you might want to start with this one. Movie number 13, The Cat Returns. This 2002 film is sort of a spin-off of Whisper of the Heart. It has a cat called Baron, which was also in that movie. However, the story is about schoolgirl Haru, who saves a cat's life, but little does she know that the cat is the prince of the Cat Kingdom, and his father, the king, wants Haru to marry the prince as a token of his gratitude. How Haru tries to get herself out of the bizarre situation forms the rest of the plot. This film is pure joy, especially for people who love cats. Unlike some Ghibli films that have complex themes that are meant more for adult viewers than children, The Cat Returns needs older viewers to have that little bit of a childish wonder still left in them to truly enjoy this movie. The makers infuse magic, fantasy, and fun into the plot, yet at the same time, they also subtly deal with themes like existentialism, despotism, and romanticism. The animation is rich with little details. For example, despite most of the characters being cats, the animators take great effort to make each cat look unique and in sync with their personalities. So the Cat King looks like a crazy old person drunk on power. Baron the cat who helps Haru looks like an intelligent highborn aristocrat. You get it right, details like that. The movie also has a much shorter runtime, so it's a pretty good pick for a quick watch on the weekend. Movie number 14, Howl's Moving Castle, written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki. This one came out in 2004. Like the title suggests, yes, there is a moving castle in the film, and it belongs to a wizard called Howl. The protagonist, however, is a young girl called Sophie who is turned into a 90-year-old woman by a witch because of some misunderstanding that involves Howl. I love how Miyazaki mixes the madness of magic with the wickedness of war in this film. So all of Sophie's adventure as an old woman take place while a war is raging on in the country. The animation is more vibrant and colorful than The Cat Returns, and there is this over-the-top fantasy element to Howl's Moving Castle because of the juxtaposition of the magical beings against elements of war. I actually saw this film with three of my friends, and two of them fell asleep while watching the film. They didn't enjoy it as much, so you will have to take my opinion with a pinch of salt. Movie number 15, Ponyo. I love this film, okay? It's written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki, and it's one of my favorites and just so underrated. It's Miyazaki's own whimsical and fun spin to Little Mermaid. It's about a little jellyfish, Brunhilde, that gets trapped in a glass jar after coming across a fishing trawler, and a 5-year-old human boy called Sosuke saves her from that glass jar and names her Ponyo. What Sosuke doesn't know is that Ponyo is the daughter of a sea wizard who was once human, and he's frantically looking for his daughter. Ponyo, on the other hand, instantly grows fond of Sosuke and wants to become a human girl to be by his side.
So, Ponyo, what's your dad like?
He hates humans. He keeps me in a bubble.
Huh?
So I swam away from home.
Huh?
What follows is an adorable and hilarious story by a lovely seaside town, and the animation is very watercolor painting like, so it's dreamy and beautiful to look at, even though it's not as finely detailed as some of the other animated movies by the studio. It's a lot more childlike than most of the other critically acclaimed Ghibli films. Obviously, you have two toddlers as protagonists, and maybe that's why it's not so often talked about, but for viewers like me, it's a total winner. Clearly one of my favorites. Moving on to movie number 16, Arrietty, also known as The Secret World of Arrietty. This 2010 animated film was directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi, who made his feature film debut with this title, and well, it's quite an impressive debut film, matching up to Studio Ghibli's legacy. The protagonist is called Arrietty. She's a palm-sized human girl, and her kind lives off by borrowing things from the houses of bigger humans. They're kind of like little scavengers and call themselves borrowers. It's an intriguing tale about how these little humans are trying to live in the face of great adversity, constantly hiding themselves so that they're not discovered by the humans. Through Arrietty's tale, the director humanizes all these other little beings that are constantly fighting for their survival in a world that should have been theirs, or at least equally theirs, but is dominated by human beings. Movie number 17, From Up on Poppy Hill. This 2011 film has been directed by Goro Miyazaki, Hayao's son, while the senior Miyazaki wrote the script. It's set in the 1960s, at a time when Japan was preparing for Tokyo Olympics, and the story is rich with local level student politics that largely unfolds in a school setting. The protagonist is 16-year-old Umi Matsuzaki, who is a high school student but also runs a boarding house and takes care of her grandmother and younger siblings because her mother is in the US. Umi soon strikes an unlikely friendship with the spirited Shun Kazama, who writes poetry and is leading a movement against the demolition of an old building that houses all their school's student clubs. The pace of this film is slow, and apart from the school activities, it has a very television soap like love story, a little melodramatic for a teen romance. However, since it's set in the 1960s, it has a very high nostalgia factor, taking you back to an era where you had to write letters and run to see people in person if you had something urgent to tell them. And even though the movie looks like it is made for kids, it'll hold more value for older viewers. It's not the best of Ghibli films, but worth a one-time watch. Movie number 18, The Wind Rises. This 2013 historical drama goes further back in time and is set during World War II. Honestly, even though it's one of the Ghibli movies that I saw more recently than the others on the list so far, I don't remember too much about the plot except for the fact that the protagonist is passionate about planes and dedicates a lot of his time in trying to build a fighter jet that will help give the Japanese Air Force an edge over their enemies. Hayao Miyazaki takes a lot of creative liberties with the story, so a lot of the plot is not historically accurate. The protagonist is Jiro Horikoshi, who's based on a real person of the same name. Jiro Horikoshi in real life was the chief engineer of many Japanese fighter planes, most notably the Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter. A lot of viewers might be lulled into believing that this is some sort of an inspirational biopic, like most biopics do tend to be, but it's not. It does follow the same path. We have a hero who dreams of building a perfect plane, his designs are constantly failing, and it takes him years to become successful in what he's trying to do. But in the end, a lot of his dreams and beliefs are shattered. The Wind Rises is essentially a bit of a lament. It decries war, and some critics, especially those in Japan, weren't very happy with Miyazaki's messaging in the film. But as far as pure entertainment value of The Wind Rises is concerned, it's a beautiful, sentimental ode to the human spirit of innovation. Movie number 19, The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, written and directed by Isao Takahata, we finally get back the fantasy-like whimsy in this film that is based on a 10th century Japanese tale. A bamboo cutter finds a tiny girl in a bamboo shoot and he decides to raise the girl with his wife. And because she seems like a God-given gift, they call her princess and consider her special. The best part about this film is the animation. Each frame is a delicate handmade painting. Kazuo Oga, an art director of many anime films, drew the watercolor backgrounds for Princess Kaguya. Since the tale is based on folklore, there are a lot of Japanese traditions and customs seeped into the story that makes it a visually rich production. The princess, who grew up as a free child in the forests with her parents, is soon moved to a city because her parents hope to make a refined lady out of her so that she can marry someone rich and noble. Kaguya finds these sudden impositions on her freedom claustrophobic, and she longs to run away to her childhood friends and the fields she grew up in. A lot of viewers, especially women viewers, will completely find this relatable because of the society's never ending obsession with marrying a suitable person. The climax of this movie is a bit of a departure from the rest of the story, so realists might be a little disappointed with the whimsical end. But for Ghibli fans like me, The Tale of Princess Kaguya is one of the studio's most captivating animated film yet. Try and watch it if you haven't. Movie number 20, When Marnie Was There, written and directed by Hiromasa Yone Banashi. This is a poignant tale about an orphan girl called Ana Sasaki who befriends a mysterious rich girl called Marnie who lives in a mansion. The thing is, this was a very slow film. I saw this with my younger brother, and the two of us deserve an applause for not forwarding any bits because we were extremely optimistic that something exciting would happen eventually, but no, it never does. Don't get me wrong, there is a very interesting twist towards the climax, but it just didn't feel worth all the patient viewing the story needed. So while it might be very hard for me to tell you what my favorite Ghibli film is, I think Mani Was There was the least enjoyable of them all. So let's move on to the last title of this episode, movie number 21, Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind. This is actually not a Studio Ghibli production because it came out even before the studio was founded. However, since the 1984 film was written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki, who sort of become synonymous with Ghibli, the title usually falls under the Ghibli brand and style of filmmaking. I saw this one very recently too, only in 2020, and was completely in awe of the futuristic story, the themes, and the animation quality. Just like a lot of Miyazaki stories, Nausicaa is an anti-war film and strongly promotes the need to foster understanding between warring clans and striking a balance between nature and human civilization. The protagonist is Nausicaa, a princess who frantically tries to stop nations from going to war against each other. She's like this epic fantasy hero. She's fearless with the nerves of steel and can bring things and people together. The story is set thousands of years ahead in the future, where the earth is so polluted that the forests have become toxic traps of death. Needless to say, decades later, the film is still very relevant, and if you have never seen a Studio Ghibli film, let Nausicaa the Valley of the Wind be your first pick. So those are the 21 Ghibli films that I watched and loved. The only Ghibli film that I have not seen is Tales of the Earthsea because I did not like the trailer and the reviews for the movie is not great either. And the last one that came out in 2020, it's called Earwig and the Witch. And again, I did not like the trailer for the film. So yeah, maybe I'll watch something else if it comes up in the future, but it's a wrap on this episode. Talk to you in the next one.